The events of 67 BC in Pontus were pretty crazy, to say the least. Mithridates was gaining more soldiers as thousands of people flocked to his side to support him. They wanted him back, and many of them were veterans and defectors from Rome. The two Fimbrian legions who were guarding Pontus, as I mentioned before at the Iris River, were now ready to fight Mithridates, as winter had passed. Mithridates had a large army and he was ready to go. This would be called the First Battle of Zela, and what exactly happened there is kind of unknown. Mithridates had learned from Sulla, and he would show it here. Before the battle actually happened, he built a ditch behind the Romans and then had it flooded. When the fight started, Mithridates had only put a small force to pin the Romans down on one side, and on the other, he ordered the majority of his troops to push as hard as they can and force the Romans back. This eventually worked, and Mithridates' well-placed cavalry and well-timed cut down the rest of the Romans, and the ones who thought they could make it out were trapped by the trench. Eventually, all the Romans were cut down. Mithridates was finally gaining the advantage, and now he had his kingdom back in hands. This was a humiliation to the Romans, in my opinion. Lucullus then met with Pompey in Cilicia, and the two generals almost killed each other, as Lucullus pointed out that Pompey waits to steal others' glory. And that is true, but Pompey pointed out that at this point Lucullus was traveling around Asia Minor like a maniac for his own glory. Pompey then began to march to Mithridates, and he was in Cabiria, camping near the hillside. But this is where Pompey would meet a completely alien foe. And this foe was called the Turret Folk, and they were deadly and ferocious, and they knew how to use their poison, and they knew how to poison foods. The Turret Folk watched as Pompey and his legions were marching in the plain. They laid out honeycombs for the Romans to take, and the advance guard of Pompey's army took these honeycombs. And at first, they began to taste a metallic tasting in their mouth, and eventually they began throwing up and became paralyzed. The turret folk took advantage of this, and with their axes cut the heads off of all the legionaries, and this added up to about 1,000 men. Pompey was horrified to see how vicious these tribesmen were. They hated the Romans, and they hated invaders, but they especially hated the Romans. They wanted them gone. Pompey, however, made it to Mithridates, and near the town of Lycos, he attacked his fort at midnight, and Mithridates' archers fired a volley, but they mistook the shadows of Pompey's legions as their actual people, and they hit the shadows, which did absolutely nothing. And the legionaries eventually got in and began massacring the Pontic troops. Mithridates barely got out with barely an army. There was almost nothing left to what he had at this point. Mithridates, at this point, basically fell off the face of the earth. Pompey thought he had died, because Pompey went into Caucasia, the modern Azerbaijanis, and he couldn't find where Mithridates went. And that was mainly due to the slaves and scouts he was using. They deliberately led him on the wrong path. He went all the way to the Caspian Sea. He was kind of lost at this point, and he was once again fighting a shadow. Pompey then made his way to Tigranes, who was in Artaxata, and Tigranes, who was in his 70s, was done fighting. He had no urge to fight anymore. He had built a very good empire, but at this point, Pompey just agreed to give over some land, and Tigranes would become a vassal. Pompey also fought the Albanians and Iberians, and again, they were two other tribes who did not like the Romans, and they wanted them out, but like the other kings, they too were defeated. Mithridates escaped to the Bosphorus, where in Panticapaeum he spent the rest of his days, until his son Pharnacus would later rise up and have a rebellion and kill him. Now, I was going to end the video here, but I wanted to go over one thing that a bunch of historians, historical and modern, have debated for thousands of years. And that's the question, did Mithridates actually kill himself? Now, the reason I would bring this up is because when Mithridates, well, when Pharnacus, quote unquote, sent the body back to Pompey, he was unrecognizable. The face was basically gone off the whoever's body it was, and there was a commonly placed scar on one of his legs, which any veteran cavalryman could have shown. And a lot of cavalrymen had scars on their legs, and Mithridates had one of them too. Many historians have been led up to think that Pharnacus, his son, who started the rebellion, allowed Mithridates to escape into modern-day Russia. And if anybody could come up with something like faking their death to the Romans, it was Mithridates. He was a trickery person. Many historians think it was Mithridates who decided to take Mithridates' place. And he was the cavalry commander, so obviously he could have had the same exact scar. His face could have been obliterated with some acid, and he could have just taken Mithridates' armor and other things that he carried with him and was sent back to Rome. That was a very plausible thing, but nobody really knows. Now let's look at who would have actually accompanied Mithridates if he would have taken this journey. The only people that would have really been loyal to Mithridates are Mithridates and Hippocrates. And that was his wife at that point, and Mithridates, we don't know his fate. There are a lot of mixed things in this time of history. So let's put it like this. On a warm May morning, Mithridates and Hippocrates take their horses and leave. Mithridates throws off his cloak and takes off all his jewelry, and he becomes a nomad and lives with the nomads with Hippocrates. Many people believe this story, and in my opinion, I do too. I don't think Mithridates actually died the popular way, you could say. I think he left Panticapaeum and left Pharnacus to govern what was to become the kingdom of the Bosphorus. And he would later, like I said before, wage a fourth war on the Romans.